The Assassin's Creed series, for better or for worse, has had a lot of protagonists over its 15 years of existence. Every time I say that, it seems to get a year extra and I just feel more old, which is quite scary, but that's fine. We've seen some highs and lows in the protagonists of this series, and so I thought it was about time that I finally got around to re-ranking them. After all, since I last did it, there has been a new protagonist into the series, and as well as that, a lot of my opinions have changed. So before we jump into the video, it would really help me if you could hit like, and if you're new here and end up enjoying, make sure to subscribe with post notifications turned on so you don't miss any more videos like it. And without further ado, let's rank the Assassin's Creed protagonists from worst to best to see who is truly the best assassin. Where to begin with Cassandra, the ultimate nothing character of Assassin's Creed. When Ubisoft made the controversial decision to introduce dialogue options into Odyssey back in 2018, they were immediately hit with lore concerns and doubt, and clearly that was for good reason. Because thanks to these dialogue options, the protagonist of Odyssey, and yes, Cassandra is the canon protagonist, ended up being a blank slate character with no tangible personality traits or value structures. One minute Cassandra could be helping a man escape a terrorist militia, the next she could be murdering the innocents of a town, the next she could be having sex with pensioners, and without any coherent character motivations, it left her not only being a boring nothing character, but also near destroyed any semblance of lore the series still had left in 2018. Cassandra, to put it simply, isn't a character. She's merely an empty vessel for the player, and for that, she's far and away the worst protagonist this franchise has ever seen. Jacob Frye is to Assassin's Creed what Jar Jar Binks was to Star Wars, in the sense that he's not funny, he's not cool, and he makes every scene he's in insufferable to sit through. Being branded the quote-unquote funny assassin, we'd see a character who acted as the worst form of comic relief, taking nothing seriously, destroying everything in his path, and facing zero real moral or physical repercussions for his actions. Jacob genuinely adds no emotional weight to the story of Syndicate, and was blatantly included as to prevent Evie from being the solo protagonist of that game. I've always had a kind of love-hate relationship with Shay Patrick Cormac, for a variety of reasons. When I first played through Rogue, I saw the assassin turned Templar as an interesting spin on the assassins we'd seen prior, in the way he cared for his former brotherhood yet still questioned their intentions and ended up switching his alliances. But I was also a child when I first played Rogue, and so my critical thinking abilities weren't exactly the best. In reality, Shay Cormac is a shallow, underdeveloped character who made a superficial switch of teams because he wasn't given high priority jobs to do. The fall of Portugal at least provides some clear motivation for Shay, but his reaction to the tragedy is little more than generic anger. And without any personal connection to the city itself, it's difficult for that catastrophic character moment to carry as much weight for the player. Although Shay's lacking character is largely thanks to Rogue's minuscule main story, that's not an excuse for such shallow character writing, and it leaves him, like the game he's in, as forgettable at best. A few years ago, Connor Kenway would have been far and away at the bottom of this list, but over the past few years, for a variety of reasons, he's moved up slightly. One, there's been a barrage of terrible characters since 2012, and two, I found slightly more appreciation for Connor in recent times. Now, Connor is still a character whose journey consists of him simply doing as he's told, regardless of his own personal motivations. His hate for Charles Lee, for example, comes because he believes Lee burned down his village and killed his mother, but after it's revealed that it was George Washington that ordered that act, his views on both men stay essentially the exact same. Connor's a naive, one-note character who barely goes through any discernible arc, and comes out of his journey with the exact same outlook on the world he had going in. To be fair though, in the decades since Assassin's Creed 3's release, I've gained some more appreciation for aspects of Connor's character. Yes, he still goes through almost no development throughout the game and still acts as little more than a pawn for the man that killed his mother, but the homestead missions, which build him up as a caring leader, as well as his appreciation for the iconography of the Brotherhood and the tenets of the Creed, have led me to grow slightly more fond of this character I once genuinely despised. Evie Frye is just about the only redeeming factor of Assassin's Creed Syndicate. In spite of its atrocious gameplay, its boring narrative, and its unfortunate second protagonist, I can always take some enjoyment in seeing Evie on her hunt for the Shroud of Eden. Being the only character in the game with any discernibly layered personality, Evie presents a speck of genuine care for the franchise within a game that periodicizes its proud history. Her relationship with her brother, with Henry Green, with Lucy Thorne, it at least provides some character to grasp onto, and despite the abysmal dialogue of Syndicate, she's performed pretty fantastically, feeling like the only real human in the entire game. Although her screen time is diluted massively by her brother, given more of a chance, she probably could have stood as one of the better protagonists we've seen in the franchise. Standing as the most recent protagonist we've seen in the franchise, Eivor's journey in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is filled with meaningful relationships and an interesting arc that maintained Darby McDevitt's reputation for fantastic character writing. That being said, in spite of Eivor's growth throughout the game, in spite of her gradually evolving out of her obsession with power, in spite of her rejection of Odin's promise of eternal glory, we see by the end of the game Eivor's character arc be somewhat undone by a single line of dialogue.
Now that you have seen our enemy and you understand our cause, I wonder if you would join us. Become a hidden one.
Was this your ultimate goal, Hytham? A trial by fire? It is a kind offer, but I do not believe we fight for quite the same cause. Your creed demands that you keep your triumphs hidden. I prefer my glory to be in plain view for all to see.
If I taught you our creed, if you spent time with it, it could open your mind to another view.
Another view is always welcome. But to live without celebrating one's glory and honor and achievements is not a life for me.
The casual disregard this line places on Eivor's entire 50-hour journey is so detrimental to her character that it's near enough the only reason she slipped this far on the list. Because if not for that, as well as the DLCs further hammering home the point this line makes, Eivor would have probably broken into the top 5. That being said, this blood-soaked Drengar, I can't believe I just said that, is easily one of the better protagonists the series has seen over the last half-decade. Now, this one might surprise some people, because aside from its technical issues, the story of Assassin's Creed Unity is probably the most criticised thing about the game. And whilst I agree that the story itself is mediocre and for the most part fairly boring, I'd argue Arno himself is the exact opposite. At the beginning of the game, Arno is presented as little more than a witty, charismatic action hero, the likes of which we'd seen before in Ezio and Edward. However, over the course of the game, and especially during the Dead Kings DLC, we see Arno mature massively, growing into a figure that questions and criticises both the Assassin and Templar philosophies, and takes lessons from both orders to incorporate into the way he lives his life. A character at first driven by love becomes driven by a sort of longing for a moral understanding of the world. That being said, the narrative of Unity, even with Dead Kings, is fairly short, and with that we never get a deep enough exploration of this character for me to justify putting him higher on this list. But as always, given another game or given another year in development, Arno's story could have easily been fantastic. Bayek of Siwa, just like Assassin's Creed Origins itself, is held up massively by the performance of Abubakar Salim, but the last Magi of Egypt is still an interesting and charismatic character in his own right. Bayek's journey, although filled with narrative issues, gives him countless interesting motivations: inner conflict about his marriage, the death of his son, his obligation to the people of Egypt, his love of his people and of people generally. Despite a life filled with trauma, Bayek stands tall and plays his part as the founder of the Hidden Ones, always staying true to his principles and maintaining a righteousness that can only be admired. That being said, Bayek falls to 4 on this list mainly due to his motivations and his actions never being truly questioned throughout the course of his journey, something that I believe would have undoubtedly happened given he had a sequel. Unfortunately though, this list isn't based on hypotheticals, and so Bayek stands firmly at 4th. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is arguably the most universally loved and cherished game in the franchise, and its charismatic yet thought-provoking protagonist plays a massive part in that. Edward Kenway is an ambitious man, driven by the freedom that riches bring, so adamant in his rejection of the Creed at first, but going on to see the value in the parallels between his pirate philosophy and that of the assassins in Tulum. Edward, similar to Eivor, similar to Ezio, is a man who's but the sum of the people around him, both great and corrupt, and so we see him constantly pulled in different directions, unsure where his place in the world truly is. At the side of Ben Hornigold betraying his idols, at the side of Charles Vane and Ed Thatch plundering to their heart's content, or at the side of Mary Read, Atabai and Adewale, who use their affinity for violence to seek freedom for all, as opposed to freedom for the rich few. However, what brings out Edward's true self, the thing that truly grounds this former boy turned glorious pirate, isn't any intricate creed or philosophy. It's simply family, the longest running thematic thread in the series. Of course, people love Edward for his charisma and charm, but what they love him for more is his near picture perfect character arc. Standing as the first protagonist we ever played as in the series, Altair bin Ahad stands as probably the best example of subtle character writing. Although he's often disliked for the supposedly unengaging performance of Philip Shabazz, Altair provides one of the most fascinating arcs in the entire series, transforming from the tyrannical, borderline evil man we see in the first scene, to the stem of the Brotherhood transforming into what it is today. Altair took the Levantine Assassin's doctrines and tore them apart, of course righting the 3 ironies and essentially rebuilding a Brotherhood that had become self-indulgent, that built castles titles in its name and built hierarchies that contradicted its own ideals. By the time we reach the end of Assassin's Creed 1, thanks to his discussions with the 9 targets, he grows a nuanced perspective on the world that allows him to embody what an assassin truly should be. But of course, this doesn't make him infallible, and elements of his former self, his anger and frustration, can take him over. However, instead of ignoring these glaring flaws, both the stories he's in and the man himself acknowledge and reflect on them, building what I'd say may be the most layered and intriguing character in the entire series. But there can only be one top spot. Ezio Auditore is my favourite fictional character of all time, and his story embodies the traditional hero's journey better than perhaps any other character throughout history. And that's saying a lot. From the naive, brash 17-year-old we see at the beginning of Assassin's Creed 2, to the strong and optimistic mentor we see rebuild Rome, to the wise elder we see come to terms with his place in the world, and move on from the rage-fueled revenge that began his journey. We see Ezio go through each stage of the monomyth, and with each passing chapter, we see him grow into a better man. We see his understanding expand, both of the creed and of the world, and eventually, we see him get freedom from his trauma with Sophia and his children. Ezio is a character defined by his ability to bring those around him together, to build lasting legacies and to reflect on his past motivations, growing them and shifting them, as opposed to maintaining a dogmatic approach to the world and to his goals. And although Ezio is but a conduit for Isu's message to Desmond, he also stands as one of the most influential and important figures in the history of the Brotherhood, and in the history of games as a medium. And for that reason, he will more than likely always stand at the very pinnacle of this list. But of course, the series has so many protagonists, and with that, I'm sure there'll be people who have plenty of other opinions. So if you agree with me or disagree with me, let me know why in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, it would really help me out if you could hit like. If you're new here and enjoyed, make sure to subscribe with post notifications turned on, and if you want to support the channel, my Patreon link is in the description. With that all being said, I do hope you enjoyed. I've been Joe, aka Fountain of Scarab, and I will see you in the next one. Beautiful.